January 16, 1942. Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood, sat in his Encino ranch house staring at a telegram that would destroy his world. The message was just 7 words long, but they hit him harder than any blow he'd ever taken on screen. And what he did next would shock a nation that thought they knew everything about their biggest movie star. This isn't the Clark Gable story Hollywood wanted you to know. This isn't about Gone with the Wind or his legendary charm. This is about the day America's most famous leading man discovered that real life doesn't have Hollywood endings, and how one terrible moment turned the king of Hollywood into a broken man searching for a way to die. You see, by January 1942, Clark Gable had everything a man could want. He was 41 years old, at the absolute peak of his career and his powers. He'd just finished Honky Tonk with Lana Turner, and MGM was paying him more money than the President of the United States was making. But more than fame or fortune, Clark had something that money couldn't buy. He had Carole Lombard. And in 7 words, she was gone forever. Carole Lombard wasn't just Clark's wife, she was his salvation. When they married in 1939, Hollywood insiders said it wouldn't last. Clark was known as a ladies' man, a charmer who'd already been married twice. Carole was a screwball comedy queen with a mouth like a sailor and a heart bigger than Texas. But something magical happened when these two got together. Carole saw through Clark's movie star facade to the insecure farm boy from Ohio underneath. And Clark found in Carole the first woman who could make him laugh at himself. They lived on a 20-acre ranch in Encino, far from the Hollywood spotlight. Carole would greet Clark at the door wearing nothing but an apron and a smile. Clark would chase her around the house like a lovesick teenager. They were ridiculously, impossibly happy. "I never knew what love was until I met Carole," Clark told his friend Spencer Tracy. "Everything before her was just playing house." But on January 15th, 1942, their perfect world began to crack. America had been at war for just over a month since Pearl Harbor. The country was mobilizing, and Hollywood was doing its part. The Treasury Department asked major stars to appear at war bond rallies across the nation. Carole volunteered immediately. She would fly to Indianapolis, her hometown, for a massive rally at the Cadle Tabernacle. The goal was to raise $2 million in a single evening. Clark didn't want her to go, not because he doubted her ability. Carole could sell war bonds better than anyone, but because he had a terrible feeling about the trip. "Take the train," he begged her. "Flying in winter weather, it's not safe." Carole laughed and kissed his forehead. "Pappy," she said, her pet name for him, "I'll be fine. It's one night, one flight. I'll be back before you know it." If only she had listened. The rally in Indianapolis was a tremendous success. Carole, dressed in a stunning red dress that made her look like a movie star goddess, sold $2.1 million in war bonds in a single evening. The crowd went wild. She was magnificent. After the rally, Carole called Clark from her hotel. "We did it, Pappy," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Over $2 million. Can you believe it?" Clark could hear the exhaustion in her voice beneath the excitement. "Come home, baby," he said. "Take the train. Get some rest." But Carole was eager to get back to him. "I'm taking the morning flight," she said. "I want to be in your arms tomorrow night." Those were the last words Clark Gable would ever hear his wife speak. On January 16, 1942, at 7:20 p.m., TWA Flight 3 crashed into a mountainside just outside Las Vegas, Nevada. All 22 people on board were killed instantly. Among them was Carole Lombard, America's sweetheart, Clark Gable's beloved wife. And the light of his life. The telegram Clark received simply read, Carol Lombard killed plane crash stop investigating stop advise immediately stop. Clark read those words and something inside him died. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat in his chair for 6 hours, holding that piece of paper, until his friend Eddie Mannix found him there the next morning. "Clark," Eddie said gently. "Clark, we need to talk about arrangements." Clark looked up at him with eyes that Eddie would later describe as completely empty. "She's really gone?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Clark, she's gone." What Clark Gable did next shocked everyone who knew him. Within 48 hours of receiving news of Carol's death, Clark Gable walked into an Army recruiting station in downtown Los Angeles and enlisted as a private. He was 41 years old, worth millions of dollars, and could have had any number of deferments. But he wanted to fight. "I want to kill Germans," he told the recruiting sergeant. It was that simple, that direct. The Army didn't know what to do with him. Here was the biggest movie star in the world, wanting to serve as a common soldier. The publicity value alone was enormous. But Clark had specific requirements. "No publicity tours," he told them. "No Bond drives. I want combat duty. I want to fly bombing missions over Germany." But the real reason Clark wanted to fight would break your heart. Clark's friends knew the truth. He wasn't looking to be a hero. He was looking for a way to die with honor. He'd lost the only thing that mattered to him, and he couldn't see a reason to go on living. Spencer Tracy visited Clark at the ranch before he left for basic training. He found his friend in Carol's bedroom, surrounded by her clothes, her perfume bottles, her photographs. "I should have been on that plane," Clark said. "If I'd gone with her, she'd be alive. Or we'd be dead together. Either way would be better than this." Tracy tried to reason with him. "Clark, you can't think like that. Carol wouldn't want." "Don't," Clark cut him off. "Don't tell me what Carol would want. Carol wanted to come home to me, and she's dead because I let her. Get on that plane alone." The transformation of Clark Gable from movie star to soldier was remarkable, and heartbreaking. Private Clark Gable reported to basic training at Miami Beach on August 12, 1942. At 41, he was older than most of the drill sergeants, but he never complained, never asked for special treatment. He scrubbed latrines, peeled potatoes, and marched in formation with kids young enough to be his sons. His fellow recruits were initially starstruck, but Clark's humility and work ethic quickly won their respect. He helped struggling recruits with their studies. He shared his cigarettes and his candy from home. He became not the king of Hollywood, but just another GI preparing for war. But everyone could see he was a man carrying tremendous pain. He rarely smiled. He never talked about his movies or his fame. And when mail call came around, while other soldiers got letters from girlfriends and wives, Clark got nothing but official correspondence. He'd written to MGM and told them to stop forwarding his fan mail. "I'm not Clark Gable anymore," he told his commanding officer. "I'm just another soldier." What happened when Clark Gable finally got to combat would test every assumption about courage and cowardice. After completing flight training, Captain Clark Gable, he'd been promoted due to his natural leadership abilities, was assigned to the 351st Heavy Bombardment Group in England. His job was to fly in B-17 Flying Fortress bombers over Nazi Germany, documenting aerial combat for training films. But Clark had other plans. Instead of staying safely behind with the camera crew, he insisted on flying combat missions as a tail gunner. He wanted to be in the most dangerous position, on the most dangerous aircraft, in the most dangerous theater of the war. His first mission was to bomb submarine pens in occupied France. As their B-17 crossed over German territory, it was immediately attacked by Messerschmitt fighters. Clark found himself in a life-or-death battle 25,000 feet above enemy territory. And that's when something extraordinary happened. As German fighters dove at their bomber, Clark Gable discovered something he hadn't expected. He wanted to live. When the first burst of cannon fire tore through their aircraft, when he saw the ground rushing up to meet them, something inside Clark awakened. It wasn't fear, it was purpose. For the first time since Carol's death, he had a reason to survive. He had a job to do, men depending on him, and enemies to fight. Clark manned his gun position with deadly efficiency. He helped fight off 3 separate fighter attacks, and his bomber limped home to England with 47 bullet holes in it. That night, Clark wrote his first letter in months. It was to Carol's mother. "Dear Ma," he wrote, "I think Carol would be proud of me today. I finally found something worth fighting for again. Not revenge, not death, but life. Our life, the life she believed in. I'm going to honor that. I'm going to come home." Over the next 5 months, Clark Gable flew 5 combat missions over Nazi Germany. Each time, he volunteered for the most dangerous positions. Each time, he performed with courage and distinction. But more importantly, each mission brought him a little bit closer to the man Carol had fallen in love with. His fellow airmen watched him change. The hollow-eyed man who'd arrived in England began to smile again. He started telling stories about his movies, sharing photographs of Carol, talking about their life together. "She was something special," he told his bomber crew one night. "She would have loved you guys. She always said the best people were the ones who weren't trying to impress anybody." But Clark's war service came with a cost that almost broke him all over again. On his 5th mission, a bombing run over occupied Belgium, Clark's aircraft was severely damaged by anti-aircraft fire. The pilot was wounded, and their bomber was losing altitude rapidly. Clark made a decision that would haunt him for years. Instead of bailing out over occupied territory, where he might be captured and used for Nazi propaganda, he helped the wounded pilot nurse the damaged bomber back to England. They made it, barely. But during that desperate flight home, Clark received word over the radio that another bomber in their formation had gone down. Among the crew was Lieutenant Jimmy Morrison, a 19-year-old kid from Indiana who reminded Clark of himself at that age. Morrison's bomber had crashed in occupied France. All 10 crew members were killed. That night, Clark sat in his barracks and wept for the first time since Carol's death. But these weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears for Jimmy Morrison, for all the young men who wouldn't be going home, for the wives who would get telegrams like the one he'd received. Clark Gable returned to Hollywood. In 1944, a changed man. The king of Hollywood was gone, replaced by someone deeper, more thoughtful, more human. He still had his famous charm, but now it was tempered with genuine wisdom and hard-earned humility. His first film back was Adventure with Greer Garson. The advertising campaign proclaimed, "Gable's back and Garson's got him." But the man who returned wasn't quite the same Clark Gable who'd left. Director Victor Fleming, who'd worked with Clark before the war, noticed the difference immediately. There was a depth to Clark's performances after the war that hadn't been there before, he said. He'd lived through real tragedy, real danger. It showed in every scene. But the most important change in Clark Gable wasn't visible on screen. Clark began using his fame and fortune differently. He quietly established a scholarship fund for the children of servicemen killed in action. He never publicized it, never took credit for it. It was his way of honoring Jimmy Morrison and all the others who didn't make it home. He also began visiting veterans' hospitals, not for publicity, but just to spend time with wounded soldiers. He would sit with them, listen to their stories, and share some of his own. One veteran, Sergeant Tom Bradley, who'd lost both legs in the Pacific, later recalled, "Clark Gable sat with me for 3 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. But what I remember most was that he didn't treat me like a hero or a victim. He treated me like a man who'd done his job. That meant everything. The real test of Clark Gable's transformation came in 1949. Clark was filming Any Number Can Play when he received word that Carol's mother was dying. Ma Lombard had been like a second mother to Clark, and he dropped everything to be at her bedside as Ma lay dying. She took Clark's hand and said something that completed his healing. "Clark, honey, you've made Carol proud. You've become the man she always knew you could be. Now stop carrying that guilt and start living again." 6 months later, Clark married Lady Sylvia Ashley, a British socialite. The marriage didn't last. They were too different. But it proved that Clark was ready to love again. Clark Gable's final years revealed the true measure of the man he'd become. In 1955, Clark married Kay Williams Spreckles, a woman who brought him genuine happiness. She understood his past, accepted his grief for Carol, and loved him not as a movie star, but as a man. Clark's last film, The Misfits, was perhaps his finest performance. Playing an aging cowboy facing the end of an era, Clark brought a lifetime of experience to the role. The pain, the wisdom, the acceptance, it was all there on screen. On November 16, 1960, Clark Gable died of a heart attack at the age of 59. At his funeral, Spencer Tracy delivered a eulogy that captured the essence of the man behind the legend. "Clark Gable was the king of Hollywood," Tracy said. "But more than that, he was a man who faced the worst tragedy life could offer and found a way to keep going. He showed us that real strength isn't about never falling down. Real strength is about getting back up and finding something worth fighting for." Today, when we watch Clark Gable on screen, we're seeing more than just a movie star. We're seeing a man who lost everything that mattered and found a way to build meaning from the wreckage. We're seeing someone who understood that fame and fortune mean nothing without love, but that love, once found and lost, can still inspire a life worth living. Clark Gable's story isn't just about Hollywood glamour or war heroism. It's about resilience. It's about how human beings can survive the unthinkable and still find ways to serve others, to love again, to matter. The telegram that destroyed Clark Gable in 1942 ultimately led to his salvation. Not because tragedy made him stronger, that's too simple, but because tragedy showed him what truly mattered. Not his image, not his fame, not his carefully constructed persona. What mattered were the people he loved, the service he could give, and the example he could set. Carol Lombard died on January 16, 1942. But in losing her, Clark Gable found something he didn't even know he'd been missing: himself. The real self, not the movie star version, but the man Carol had seen and loved beneath all the Hollywood glitter. And that man, the real Clark Gable, proved to be even more remarkable than the king of Hollywood had ever been. Every time you see Clark Gable tip his hat or flash that famous grin in an old movie, remember, you're looking at a man who faced the worst life could offer and chose to keep fighting. Not for glory, not for fame, but for the simple, powerful reason that life, even life marked by terrible loss, is still worth living. That's the real legacy of Clark Gable. Not just that he was the king of Hollywood, but that he was a man who showed us how to be human, when being human is the hardest thing in the world. What do you think? Does Clark Gable's story of love, loss, and redemption remind you of the strength you've seen in your own generation? Share your thoughts about the people who showed you how to keep going when keeping going seemed impossible. If Clark's story moved you, subscribe for more tales of the real people behind Hollywood's golden age. Because the best stories aren't always the ones that made it to the movies. They're the ones that made the movies possible. Sometimes the greatest performances happen off camera, when nobody's watching except the people who matter most.